About 20 years ago, I wrote a book. Didn't get published till 16 years ago, but I wrote it about 20 years ago, called The Day I Swapped My Dad for Two Goldfish. And it's gone on to become a beloved book, this wonderful picture book illustrated by Dave McKean. And it's all about a kid who swaps his dad for two goldfish and then discovers that the dad has been swapped to some other kid for an electric guitar and swapped to some other kid for a gorilla mask and swapped to another kid for a rabbit. And he's having to follow his dad around town. And his dad's just reading the paper and has absolutely failed to notice that he's been swapped amongst a bunch of kids. And when they catch up with the father, he's sitting in a rabbit hutch, rabbit pen, reading his newspaper and rather glumly eating a carrot. And this book has gone on over the last 2 decades to become very popular. And people give it to their children, and worse, people give it to fathers as a Father's Day gift. And I've started feeling increasingly guilty that maybe I had done fathers a great wrong. I myself am a father, and while my children might tell you that I was the kind of father who could have been swapped for two goldfish without ever noticing if I was perhaps reading a newspaper or a book or just busy, I like to feel this is a gross and terrible calumny, and that actually it was time to strike a blow for fathers everywhere. And so really, fortunately, The Milk was an attempt to write a non-daddist book. You know, and also it's true that at the beginning of most children's books, parents die horribly. It's normally the thing you do first to your parents to get them off stage so that kids can have an adventure. And I thought, actually, why aren't there any children's books in which parents get to have an adventure? So I thought I would do the single most exciting possible thing that I could do in a book, which is send somebody's dad out to the corner shop to get some milk for their cereal. And that's where it all begins. It is quite true that fortunately The Milk contains a number of very advanced and complicated scientific theories, many of which are true. It is also true that there may be parents out there in the world who have difficulty in grasping these things, and who, when reading Fortunately The Milk to their children, go, hang on, I'm not sure, is this the same bottle of milk from 15 minutes earlier in time, or is it from later? And their children, who have grown up watching Doctor Who, will look at them in pity, going, it's wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey, it's absolutely straightforward. Look, this was the bottle of milk here, this is the bottle of milk there, and, you know, here is the emerald of Splod, you know, the jewel, the eye of Splod, here it is several million years later, we've dropped it off there, we've gone back, we've got it here, we've left it there. And I'm very good. All of my time loops are actually completely fair. The logic is as logical as, you know, it may not be rigorous. There is a point where a scientific theory is proposed that if two objects, which are the same object, separated by time and brought together, touch, then the universe will end. Or several little men with flower pots on their heads will come dancing through the streets, and everybody is putting their money on the universe ending. I'm not going to say which happens. That may not be quite as rigorous. Although if it ever happens, and it turns out that it is the little men, I want a Nobel Prize. I think if the question is science fiction becoming the new fairy tales, the answer is obviously not. The old fairy tales are resilient, they are tough, they are glorious, and they are like cockroaches. They will survive world wars, they will survive nuclear holocausts. You know, I have no doubt that Red Riding Hood as a story will survive the world exploding. You know, somewhere out there it'll keep going. But I do think it's our responsibility as storytellers to come up with new stories and new types of stories. And I'm very famous for doing creepy stories and doing strange stories and doing fairy tales and doing fantasies and bringing graveyards to life and other mothers and all that kind of stuff. But I also get to do things like write Doctor Who. And I grew up reading science fiction. And the idea of writing a glorious, silly, goofy, the kind of thing that I would have loved if it had been around when I was a kid. The kind of thing that I did love when I discovered Douglas Adams. The kind of thing that I loved from a different kind of direction when I discovered Roald Dahl. Writing one of those just seemed like a wonderful place to be.
This is another book illustrated by Chris Ridell. I wondered, how do you actually work with him? To what extent do your worlds intersect when you're both working out? Just how do you work with him?
Chris Ridell and I have a very, very complex and dangerous working method, which begins with dinner. We have a long dinner. At the end of the long dinner, once Chris has got a little bit drunk and I say to him, "So will you illustrate this book?" And he says, "Oh yes," because he's in a good mood and he'll agree to anything. I then give him the manuscript and stand well back. And you just give him the manuscript and you wait, and then you get these amazing books back. So that's my method currently, working method with Chris. Dinner, get him to agree to do the book, run away. I have a tendency, especially when kids are around, to just go off on interesting flights of fancy and to explore ideas. And my poor children, who have grown up to be normal, sensible things. You know, my oldest son is now a senior software engineer at Google, and he really likes real things. And my daughter, my middle daughter, is now a milliner in San Francisco because she likes making hats, because hats are sensible things that you can touch, and they don't go off and transform into imaginary things on you. But I do remember, as a boy, my son looking up at me incredibly glumly at dinner as I'd gone off on some kind of glorious flight of fancy, and he just looked at me and he said, "Dad, you're making things up again. Why do you make things up all the time?" And there was a long pause, and I thought about it, and I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but it is paying for your dinner." As a young man, we were out of milk, but I could see there were tins of stuff called evaporated milk, and I thought, well, that's just going to be, I've seen the telly ads, it's going to be just like milk. And I remember pouring it on my sugar puffs and getting a very, very nasty shock.